Rev up your engines!
Well, Ford's recalling the Ford Bronco Sports because their fuel injectors might crack and leak. Okay, here we go. Made in Mexico. The regular Broncos are made in Michigan, but the Ford Bronco Sports are made in Mexico. I always warn people, do you really want to buy a 3-cylinder little 1.5-liter engine? Especially in something that's a reasonable size like the Bronco Sport. It's not tiny, right? Putting these tiny engines in, new designs, now the fuel injectors might be cracking and leaking. So Ford's got to recall them. And here's their hilarious recall. I mean, to me, I don't know how they can get away with this crap. Their solution is to have some software put in so that if it's leaking, if the pressure drops, you'll get a warning that says, oh, gee, your fuel system might be leaking. Go get it serviced. And they're also going to put a fuel draining line to take the fuel away from the head if it leaks. So it won't leak on the engine, but it would still be leaking on the ground. Talk about a fire hazard. How they can get away with crap like this, that it's allowed. These things could be leaking. Oh, well, we'll give you a warning, and we'll also have a little tube to kind of drain the fuel away. It's still going to be leaking on the ground. Gasoline as you drive down the road, or even worse, if you park it and you're in a parking lot, some guy lights a cigarette or throws a cigarette in the ground, woof goes your car. What a half-assed way to fix something. I mean, it's unbelievable how they can get away with this. Well, here's our solution. We're not going to replace the fuel injectors. That costs too much money. We'll put a little drain tube on it. Yeah, give you a little warning, like, come on. Man, it's unbelievable how these corporations get away with stuff. They're making a dangerous product. They should be forced to fix it, not put some half-assed, well, we'll drain the fuel away. It'll drip in the ground instead. You still don't want any fuel dripping anywhere, right? Come on now, Ford. What kind of a solution is this? Major Klein says, who is responsible? I got a big truck, and I went to a local repair shop to swap fuel tanks. The mechanic said he finished the repair, but only put 8 gallons in the tank. Not enough fuel for the pickup tube to reach it, and he started the truck and idled till it died. Now it won't start, and he says it's my fault, and I have to pay to get it towed and repaired elsewhere. What should I do? One, I wouldn't have trusted that guy to do anything else. Take it someplace else. Make the other guy pay for it. He screwed up. If he's working on it and he doesn't know that you got these gigantic tanks and 8 gallons isn't enough, it's his fault for being an idiot. What kind of a mechanic, in quotes mark, is he's working on this big truck with these huge 2 fuel tanks, and he didn't even realize you got to put a whole bunch of fuel because the bottom doesn't really reach all that well. It's his fault. Of course it's his fault. Now, the guy sounds like an idiot, so I doubt if he has insurance or anything, but what you might do if you don't want to tow it anywhere is get a bunch of gas, put it in, right? Do this because it often works. It's a great trick. Bring a bunch of old towels with you. Jam the towels into the exhaust. It builds up back pressure. So while you're cranking it, since it won't start now, a lot of times that builds up pressure and then it will get the fuel in and it will start up. I did that if you watched the Volkswagen video I made last year in Tennessee. The guy had one that wouldn't start and I just stuffed rags in the exhaust. I cranked, and all of a sudden, blum, 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 and it blew the exhaust rags out that I'd stuffed in and it ran perfectly fine. In his case, he needed a fuel pump because his fuel pump was going out, the one inside the gas tank. Some rags in those exhausts. You might find it'll build up enough back pressure it can start, you can drive it away and then never drive it back to this guy's place because he's an idiot. Pestilential says, I can't turn the key in the ignition to any position. I got no 7 Honda Fit. I can put the key in and out, but I can't turn it, and I have no spare key. It's one of 2 problems. Generally means your key's worn out, and unfortunately, you didn't listen to me in the past. If you didn't see me in the past, I can't blame you, but if you saw me, then you should have listened. Get a key. Stick it in a drawer. Have an extra key in a drawer. Then when your key doesn't work, get that one out. Could be just the key's worn out. That'll start it. Then with a new key that starts it, go get another spare key, put it in a drawer, and the one that doesn't work, throw it away. It may not just be the key. It might be your ignition switch assembly. It's 07 Honda. You can go to most auto parts stores and they can sell you the key and the ignition switch part. On the top, just the tumbler, not the electrical part, just the mechanical part. And you can stick your key in, and then you pop the whole assembly out, and then you pop the new one. And you'll have a different key then for the doors and for the ignition. But at least you won't have to pay a locksmith or something now. That's generally what the problem is. If it's not the key worn out, which you can't tell because you don't have a spare. So if you did have a spare and it didn't work, then you know it was the ignition switch for sure. But you don't. So you might just go and get a key and the ignition part. Get your old one out, put that in, that should fix it entirely. Mustang man says, Scott, I got a 93 Explorer for $500 with 365,000 miles. I got it running. The brakes don't work well and the power steering pump makes noise when I turn. Thoughts? Well, what do you think you're going to get for $500 with that miles? Your power steering pump is full of fluid and it's not leaking and it makes noise, but it steers okay. Live with it. Fords make noise. They have crappy pumps. But I've seen many of them that make noise when you turn, but they still work. Now, if it's low on fluid, fill it up. The noise will go away. Then it means you got a leak. You got to find where the leak is and fix it, right? Now, the brakes could be a zillion things. Take off the wheel. See if the pads are thin. Here's a really good test. The engine turned off. Step on the brakes and it's hard. Then you start it up and you step on the brakes and it sinks. That means you have a bad booster. Because when you start the car, the booster will make it sink if it's going bad, but it'll be hard when you have the car turned off because then the booster doesn't have any vacuum boost. So do that test too and figure out what's wrong. Dead End Boss says, I got a headlight problem. I got an Acura TL with aftermarket HID headlights. For some reason, I turn on my low beams. Only the passenger light turns on. The bulbs are good and the ballast stop. I put new headlight relays. The fuses are good. Can you tell me how to fix it? You have aftermarket HID, high intensity discharge. Nobody uses those things anymore. They're halogens and they made the HIDs, which are brighter, but they're extremely high voltage. With that high voltage, they can often have problems with the wiring that's in your car. And you have an Acura, which is a Honda product. The wires are kind of thin to begin with. They're not really made for HID. This is why modern cars, you don't see HIDs anymore. They come with factory LEDs because the LEDs use less electricity. They don't get hot. They don't need thick wires. If I were you, I would switch it to LEDs. You can buy kits cheaply enough. HIDs are not really made for that Honda system. The wires are too thin. You'd probably have to rewire the whole thing to make it work correctly. And the LEDs are so easy. You just take out the bulbs, you put in the LEDs, and the good ones have ballast resistors built in line. So all you do is unplug your old ones and plug the new ones in, because where you plug them in, there's a plug, and the ballast resistor is built into the system, and then it goes to the LED bulbs. I would just swap them out to LEDs if I were you. HIDs, there have always been problems. Mercedes was one of the first ones because they said, it's as bright as the noontime sun, but it's midnight. These things are so bright. And they were bright, but they're very expensive. The bulbs cost a fortune. They burn out all the time. Switch to LEDs. Smarter move. All right, so Scotty, rant about politics. We all know you love it when you do. I have met all kinds of politicians. And I do have to say, I agree with the South Park cartoon, where years ago, presidential election, they had the election, and it was election between a turd and a pig. Well, that's pretty much the choice we have in America today. There's no independent party that gets anything. They'll never get elected because the other two parties fight to keep it amongst themselves. They're all lawyers. They all got corporations stuck in money in their back pockets, so they'll do whatever the corporations do when they get elected. Then they get in and they tell you lies about how they care about you while they sit on Capitol Hill and sip their martinis and go to fundraising parties with the corporations. You know, it's disgusting, but that's what this country has come to these days. Somebody, even if you got in and tried to change it, you probably couldn't because there's too much corruption in Washington, D.C. And they're all on the take to the corporations. I mean, that's just the way that it goes. They say one thing, but then they do whatever the corporations have paid them to say. It's sad, but it's true. I wish there was somebody out there that was doing anything about it except talking, but hey, it's all talk and no action. Then you think, oh, you're going to change. Okay, now take Dr. Oz, right? He was running for senator of Pennsylvania, right? What a guy to pick. I met him. He's one of the most obnoxious people I ever met in my life. I met him when I was doing my gig in CBS TV, right? Obnoxious guy, brushes people away, get out of my way, puts an image on TV when the cameras are off. You see the true person, and he's obnoxious as can be. I'd never vote for the guy. I couldn't because I don't live in Pennsylvania. But you decide, let's change. And what are you going to change to? Somebody who's just as bad or worse than the guy that's in now. So, I mean, they're running football players. Okay, it's one thing. Whizzer White, if you know anything about University of Illinois, he was a great football player, and he was on the Supreme Court eventually. He's a very smart guy. Well, very few football players are smart as that guy was. It's getting to be kind of a clown show who they decide to run. What choice do we have, you know? The middle class is shrinking. I even did a video on that. And that's the backbone of this country. And nobody's for the middle class. They say they are, but they really aren't. They're all rich people. And they say stuff like, depending on which side you're on, they always try to play to them. These same politicians that hate socialized medicine have it the rest of their life. They get free Medicare the rest of their life because they were a senator, right? We talk about hypocrites. They're all hypocrites. I don't care what they say they are. I've met them from both sides, and from my experience, they are all hypocrites. All of them. Kissing babies, all that stuff. That's what they do. You know, behind the scenes, where the money rolls, follow the money. Don't follow the blah, blah, blah of the politicians. Follow the money and see what's actually going on. And sad but true, we really don't have a choice about anything. They're all paid off by the corporations. It's such a corrupt system. I see very little hope. But, as my father once said, the United States is great in spite of its political system, not because of it. And I think he was right. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.